The room was already loud when Min-jae raised 2 fingers and Kayla walked over. "Gukwaju." "Neat," he said. She poured, set it down. He picked it up, sniffed it, put it back without drinking. "This isn't what I asked for. It's what you pointed at." Laughter rippled from a nearby table. His jaw tightened. "Do you know who I am? I know you're a man who can't order a drink right and wants it to be my fault." He stood, voice carrying across the ballroom now. "There's an old dance, Taepyeongmu. Nobody outside my family has ever performed it correctly. If you can finish it, right here, I'll marry you." Silence spread table by table. Somebody laughed behind a hand. Kayla set her tray down and kicked off her heels. A drummer picked up a rhythm. She found the center of the floor, closed her eyes, and moved. Nobody laughed after the first 30 seconds. Old men who'd seen the dance performed in Seoul decades ago rose from their chairs. Min-jae's mother pressed a hand to her mouth. Kayla dropped into a final bow, palms flat against the floor, and the room stood. Min-jae walked toward her like his legs belonged to someone else. He pulled the ring off his own finger and knelt. "I gave my word." She looked down at him, at the ring, at 200 people holding their breath. "Keep your ring. I don't want a promise you made because you got caught being cruel. If you ever mean it, really mean it, you know where to find me." She walked out barefoot. Nobody moved. Min-jae knelt there, exposed in front of everyone who feared him. "Before we begin, tell us something. Are you watching on your own, or is someone sharing this story with you tonight? And where in the world are you joining us from? Leave your city, state, or country in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, settle in, and prepare yourself for another unforgettable story. Welcome to Afro-Korean Unique Tales. 20 minutes before any of that happened, Min-jae had walked into the bar area distracted, a number from his father's office lighting up his phone. "Gukwaju," he said, looking down at his screen instead of the shelf. Kayla reached for the bottle 2 down from the one he'd pointed at, poured it, slid it across. He tasted it, grimaced. "This is wrong. You pointed right there. I said Gukwaju. You said it while looking at your phone and pointing at Jin." He set the glass down hard enough to crack the ice. His father's deal had collapsed an hour earlier over a shipment nobody could account for, and none of that was Kayla's fault, but she was standing in front of him and the deal wasn't, so he let the anger land where it was easiest. He walked off toward the main floor, already deciding he'd embarrass her in front of the room, and by the time the toasts started, he had his opening. Now, standing alone in the ballroom with his grandfather's ring warm in his palm, he understood exactly how much of that anger had never belonged to her at all. He waved his driver over. "Find out who she is. Everything." His mother appeared at his elbow. "You just proposed to a bartender in front of every man your father does business with." "I know what I did. Do you intend to fix it, or was that a performance?" He didn't answer. He was still watching the door she'd walked through, heels abandoned by the bar, and for the first time since taking over the family's operations, he had no plan for what came next. Kayla was pulling a double shift 3 days later when Min-jae walked in without an entourage, in a plain black jacket, like he'd tried to dress down and didn't quite know how. "I wanted to apologize," he said, sitting down at the bar. "You said sorry with a marriage proposal in front of 200 people. I think you're all out of grand gestures. I'm not here for a gesture. I was angry about something that had nothing to do with you. I took it out on you because you were standing there. That's the first honest thing you've said to me." "Prove it," she said, sliding a glass toward him. "Order a drink. Correctly, this time." "Soju. Just soju." He drank it without complaint, and stayed 2 hours, asking about her instead of talking business, where she'd learned to move like that, why she was pulling bar shifts, what she wanted that had nothing to do with money. "I want somebody who sees me before they see what I can do for them," she said. "You didn't manage that on the first try. I'm trying now." He came back the next night, and the one after that, until he stopped ordering drinks altogether, and just showed up near closing, to walk her to the train, carrying nothing, offering nothing, talking about small things. "Your men don't like this," she said one night, nodding at the car trailing them. "My men don't like anything I actually want. And what do you actually want?" I want to learn that dance. She laughed. The first real one she'd given him. It takes years. Then I'll take weeks and be bad at it. 3 weeks later, he asked her to meet him at a park by the river, empty except for the city lights on the water. He'd told no one. He started the dance badly, his feet finding the wrong rhythm, arms fighting instead of guiding, sweat on his forehead despite the cold. Kayla stopped laughing halfway through. You practice this? Every night for 3 weeks. My instructor thinks I'm insane. You are insane. I wanted you to see me try, not perform. Try. She stepped closer, and there wasn't anything else that needed saying. Word reached his mother within days. She summoned him, sat him across from her in the same room where she'd once arranged his engagement to Seon. You danced for a bartender in a public park. I danced for Kayla. Your father would have hated this. My father married you against his own mother's wishes. You've told me that story since I was a child. She had no answer. 2 weeks later, without ceremony, Kayla was invited to dinner at the estate. Not as a guest, but as someone whose name his mother finally said out loud without flinching. Kayla sat at that table in a house built to intimidate people smaller than her, and for the first time since the ballroom, let herself believe this might actually work. Dinner became a weekly thing. Kayla learned which relatives to avoid and which to lean into, learned that Min Jae's grandmother liked being asked about her garden, learned to laugh at the right moments without performing anything. The house stopped feeling like a test and started feeling like a place she might belong. Then Han So-yeon walked back into it. She arrived at a smaller family gathering nobody told Kayla about in advance, coming through the front doors like she still had a key, greeting Min Jae's mother with a kiss on both cheeks, before anyone could explain who Kayla was.
Min Jae,
She said, eyes moving past Kayla like she was furniture. You look well, So-yeon. I didn't know you were back. I came back for you. She said it lightly, like a joke that wasn't one. We were never really finished, were we? A few months apart isn't the same as ending things. We ended things 2 years ago. Did we? Nobody told me that. She turned to his mother, smiling. Did anyone tell you that, Uma? His mother didn't answer, but her silence said enough. Kayla stood near the window, drink untouched, watching a woman rewrite history in a room full of people who'd known her longer than they'd known Kayla. This is Kayla, Min Jae said, pulling her forward. She's the reason I'm still standing in this family at all. So-yeon looked her over once, unhurried. The bartender. I heard about the dance. Very romantic. She smiled at his mother again. You must be so relieved he's finally settling down. Even if it's unconventional. Nobody corrected her. That was the part Kayla noticed most. Over the following weeks, Se-yeon didn't disappear. She showed up at events she had no reason attending, sat closer to Min Jae's mother than Kayla ever had, brought up old memories in front of relatives who nodded along. She never raised her voice, never said anything overtly cruel. She simply existed in every room like a fact nobody had bothered updating. She's persistent, Kayla said one night, watching Min Jae pace after Se-yeon had cornered his aunts for an hour. She's manipulative. There's a difference. Your family doesn't seem to see it that way. My family remembers her as the woman I almost married. Give them time. But time worked against Kayla. Small things shifted. An invitation that arrived a day late. A seat at the table that quietly moved further from his mother. A comment from an aunt about how some things take longer to prove themselves. Nothing anyone could point to directly. Everything anyone could deny if confronted. Your mother's colder toward me lately, Kayla said. She's stressed. The business. My father's estate. All of it. It started after Seon came back. You're imagining things. She wasn't, and some part of him knew it. But he was too relieved to have his family's approval at all to look too closely at how fragile it had become. 3 weeks later, Kayla arrived at the estate for a Sunday dinner that had been on the calendar for over a month. The gates were closed. A staff member she didn't recognize met her at the entrance. I'm sorry, Miss Jones. Dinner's been moved. Moved where? I wasn't told to give out that information. Kayla stood at the gate of a house she'd started calling a second home, holding a bottle of wine she'd picked out that afternoon, and understood exactly whose idea it had been to leave her off the new invitation. She called Min Jae. He didn't pick up. She drove home in silence and sat in the dark, replaying every small thing she'd told herself not to notice. Min-jae showed up at her apartment, past midnight, still in his coat. "I'm sorry. My mother moved the dinner without telling me. I found out an hour after you did. Your staff knew not to tell me where. I've already spoken to her about it. Have you spoken to Seo-yeon about anything? Or does she just get to exist in every room without anyone saying a word?" He didn't have an answer that satisfied either of them. He stayed anyway, sat with her until she stopped shaking with anger, told her he'd fix it, that his mother would come around, that none of this changed what he felt. That night, neither of them talked about his family again. He stayed until morning, and for a few hours the estate, the dinners, Seo-yeon's careful campaign, none of it existed. Neither of them knew it would be the last night like that for a while. 2 weeks later, the heirloom went missing. It was a jade pendant, older than Min-jae's grandmother, kept in a locked case in the family study. Min-jae's mother discovered it gone on a Tuesday morning and had the entire staff questioned by nightfall. By Thursday, it turned up in Kayla's apartment, wrapped in a scarf at the bottom of a drawer she rarely opened. She hadn't put it there. She knew that with total certainty, standing in her own bedroom while 2 of his mother's men searched through her things with cold efficiency, like she was already guilty, and this was just paperwork. "I didn't take this," Kayla said. "Then explain how it's in your drawer," his mother said from the doorway, arms crossed. "I can't explain something I didn't do." Min-jae arrived 20 minutes later, out of breath. "This is insane. She wouldn't do this." "Then who did?" Min-jae. "It was in a locked case, in a locked room. Only family and staff have access. And now it's sitting in her apartment. Someone planted it. Or she took it and hid it badly. Nobody asked how someone could plant an object inside a locked apartment. Nobody asked about the cleaning service the family itself had recommended months earlier, the one with a spare key on file. "I believe you," Min-jae said quietly, once his mother's men had left. "I know you didn't do this. But you didn't stop them from searching my apartment like I was a criminal." "I couldn't. Not without making it worse." "Worse than this?" Kayla gestured at the empty drawer, the disturbed room, the scarf crumpled on the floor. "Your family already decided who I am. You believing me privately doesn't undo what just happened in front of everyone." He reached for her hand. She let him take it, but something in her had already started pulling back. The following week, an aunt who'd once complimented Kayla's dress crossed a room to avoid her. His mother stopped answering Kayla's texts. Seo-yeon said nothing directly, but made sure to mention the theft within earshot of anyone who'd listen. Kayla stopped attending family dinners. Something had cracked that neither of them knew how to name yet. If this story has you hooked already, drop a comment telling us where you think this heirloom really came from. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Afro-Korean Unique Tales so you don't miss what happens next. 6 weeks passed with Kayla and Min-jae circling each other carefully, neither willing to say the word that would end it. The distance between them had a shape now, something they both stepped around instead of naming. One night, worn down from weeks of quiet arguing, they stopped fighting it. Min-jae showed up unannounced, no explanation, no apology this time, just stood in her doorway until she let him in. For a few hours it was the 2 of them the way it had been in the park by the river, nothing between them but each other. Neither of them knew it would be the last night like that for a long time. 4 days later, Seo-yeon requested a private meeting with Min-jae's mother, and by the time Kayla heard about it, the meeting had already happened. "She's pregnant," his mother said, sitting across from him in the study. "She came to me first because she didn't know how you'd react. That's not possible. She has medical records. Dates that line up with before the 2 of you ended things." Min-jae sat with that, looking for the hole in it and not finding one fast enough. "I need to see her." Seo-yeon met him at a cafe 2 days later, folder in hand, everything laid out with careful precision. Dates, a doctor's letterhead he didn't recognize but had no reason yet to doubt. Her voice stayed soft the entire time. "I'm not asking you to leave her," she said. "I'm asking you to think about what happens to a child if you don't." He left that meeting, carrying a folder that felt heavier than anything he'd held in years. He didn't go to Kayla that night. He needed time, he told himself, and in the silence he left behind, Word reached Kayla before he ever found the courage to say it himself. An aunt mentioned it at a gathering Kayla wasn't at. By the time Min-jae finally called, Kayla already knew. "Is it true?" she asked, before he could say anything. "I don't know. She has records. I haven't confirmed anything yet. But you believed it enough to sit with her for 2 hours instead of coming to me first." He had no answer, and his silence told her everything the folder hadn't. Kayla didn't wait for confirmation. She'd spent months being patient with a family that searched her apartment like a suspect, with an ex who slid back into every room like she'd never left. "I'm done," she said. "Not because I think it's true, because I'm tired of finding out what's happening in my own relationship secondhand. Kayla, if there's a child, that child deserves you whole. I won't be the reason you're distracted from that." She hung up before he could argue. That night, she sat at her kitchen table and wrote him a letter, the kind of thing she should have said out loud weeks earlier. She wrote about the dance in the park, about believing him the first time he said he was trying, about wanting someone to choose her loudly instead of just believing in her quietly. She sealed it and asked Min-jae's cousin, the one who'd always been friendly, who used to bring her coffee at family events, to deliver it personally. He took the envelope, nodded, and walked out. He never delivered it. 3 days later, alone in his apartment, he burned it over a sink, doing it not out of loyalty to Seon, but out of a resentment toward Kayla that had been building since the night she'd outdanced a room his family had spent years trying to impress. Min-jae waited for a call that never came, a letter he never received, some explanation that would make sense of a woman who'd vanished from his life. He took her silence as an answer. 3 weeks after the breakup, Seon stopped attending family events altogether, citing a miscarriage. Grief, written carefully across her face whenever anyone asked. Min-jae, still reeling, didn't press her on details he assumed were too painful to revisit. Nobody thought to ask why a woman supposedly grieving a lost pregnancy never once mentioned a doctor's name beyond the original folder, never sought care anyone in the family could point to. It would be 4 years before anyone learned there had never been a pregnancy to lose at all. Only a story that needed an ending, believable enough that nobody would ask more questions, told by a woman who understood exactly how far grief could carry a lie. 6 weeks after the breakup, Kayla sat in a doctor's office for an unrelated complaint about persistent nausea and found out she was pregnant. She did the math twice, standing in the parking lot afterward, and understood exactly which night it had happened. The one before the folder, before the phone call, before she'd told him she was done. She thought about calling him. She thought about it for 3 days straight, phone in hand more than once, thumb over his name. Every time, she thought about a room full of people who'd searched her home like a criminal, about a man who'd sat across a table from his ex for 2 hours before ever coming to her. She put the phone down each time. "I'll raise this baby myself," she said out loud to an apartment that didn't answer back. "This child won't spend a single day wondering if people believe they belong somewhere." 7 weeks later, before she'd told anyone outside her own kitchen, the accident happened. Min-jae was leaving a meeting downtown when the car taking him back to the estate was run off the road on a service ramp, metal folding against a concrete divider, in a sound witnesses later described as the loudest thing they'd ever heard. His driver walked away with a broken wrist. Min-jae didn't walk away at all. He was pulled from the wreckage unconscious and put into surgery before anyone outside the family knew it had happened. The news reached Kayla secondhand, through people who didn't know she still checked. She didn't show up at the hospital demanding to be let in as family, because she wasn't family anymore, not by anything either of them had said out loud. Instead, she called a friend from nursing school, who worked in the hospital's lab, and asked, quietly, whether they were still taking donations for Kang Min-jae. They were, rare type, in short supply that week. Her friend arranged for her to give directly, off the books, no name attached to anything his family would see. She went back twice more over the following 2 weeks, each time slipping out before anyone could connect her face to the patient's chart. Through the same friend, she learned the family was struggling to keep up with certain costs insurance wouldn't cover. A specialist flown in, an experimental treatment standard care couldn't touch fast enough. Kayla transferred what she could from savings she'd been building since before she ever stepped foot in that ballroom, routed through an account with no name attached. It wasn't enough to matter to people who moved money the way his family did. It was enough to matter to her. She spent 4 nights in the hospital's public waiting area, not the private family wing where his mother and relatives cycled in and out with coffee and quiet conversation, but the ordinary room downstairs, where nobody asked who she was waiting for. She prayed in a way she hadn't done since she was a kid, not asking for him to choose her again, only that he'd open his eyes. On the 5th night, a nurse mentioned to no one in particular that the patient upstairs had woken up and was asking for water. Kayla sat with that a long moment, something in her chest unclenching for the first time in weeks. Then she stood, walked out of the hospital, and didn't come back. She told herself it was the right thing. He had a family circling him now, full attention, everyone finally showing up the way they should have all along. If he woke up wanting her, he knew where to find her. He hadn't called in months. She wasn't going to make herself the reason his healing got harder. She went home, to an apartment that felt too quiet, packed it up 2 months later, and took a job 3 states away with a woman she'd met years earlier who ran a restaurant group, expanding into a new city. She left without telling anyone from that world where to find her. Min-jae recovered fully within 4 months, walked out of physical therapy with his mother beside him, and spent the following year believing the woman who'd once outdanced an entire ballroom had simply decided he wasn't worth waiting for. He never learned about the blood, the money, the 4 nights in a waiting room downstairs. Neither of them knew the truth the other was carrying. We need to know, do you think Kayla made the right call walking away, or should she have stayed and fought? Tell us in the comments, hit like if this story has you invested, and subscribe to Afro-Korean Unique Tales so you're here for what happens next. It had been 4 years since the night Kayla walked out of that hospital without looking back. Min-jae ran the family's operations with the same precision he always had, but something in him had gone quieter, less interested in the things that used to matter. The deals, the parties, the woman his mother kept inviting to dinners in increasingly obvious ways. Soyeon still drifted through the family's orbit on occasion, her grief over a lost pregnancy long since folded into old history nobody questioned anymore. He kept his distance from her without ever fully understanding why it still felt wrong to be near her. His mother mentioned, one afternoon over tea, that a local arts foundation was hosting a charity festival that weekend. Traditional dance performances from schools across the city, proceeds going toward youth programs. She wanted him to attend, remind people the family still cared about the culture they profited from. He agreed mostly to get her to stop asking. The festival was held in a park downtown, small stages under string lights, kids in bright costumes waiting nervously by curtained-off areas while parents filmed on their phones. Min-jae stood near the back, half listening to an MC announce the next performer, a young dancer from a local studio performing the Taepyeongmu. He almost walked away before it started. He'd told himself he was done watching that dance performed by anyone who wasn't her. Then the music started, and a small girl walked onto the stage, maybe 3 years old, guided gently by an instructor standing just off to the side. She knew the steps well enough now to need only occasional cues, her arms finding the old patterns with a confidence well beyond her age. It wasn't just the technique that stopped him. It was a gesture with her wrists on the 3rd beat, small and specific, that he'd only ever seen one other person do, in a park by the river years earlier, badly and honestly, the night he'd learned the dance himself, just to prove a point. He moved closer to the stage without deciding to. The girl finished to applause, bowed the way she'd clearly been taught, and ran off toward the wings laughing. Min-jae stood rooted to the spot, telling himself it was coincidence, that instructors taught the same gestures to hundreds of students, that he was seeing what years of missing someone had trained him to see in every stranger's face. He didn't believe himself, even as he thought it. He found the instructor backstage, adjusting costumes for the next group. That last dancer, the little girl, who's her teacher. I trained her, along with a few others her age. Advanced for someone that young. She picks things up faster than most. Who's her mother? The woman hesitated. I'm not able to share that information. Please, it's important. Something in his voice must have carried enough weight, because she studied him a moment longer. I only know her by her first name, Kayla. He stood very still. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in his study, going through boxes he'd avoided since his father's death. Boxes his mother had asked him repeatedly to clear out. Near the bottom of the third box, under old ledgers and photographs, he found a journal, leather-bound, his father's handwriting filling nearly every page. He read until sunrise. Buried in an entry from over 2 decades earlier, his father had written about a family he'd quietly helped after a fire destroyed their home and killed a father and older son, leaving a mother and young daughter with nothing. His father had paid for their housing for years without telling anyone, arranged the daughter's dance lessons through a studio he funded anonymously, made sure the family never went without, all of it done in a way that left no trace back to the Kang name. The daughter's name appeared once, near the bottom of the entry, in his father's careful hand. Kayla. Min-jae sat with the journal open on his lap as the sun came up, understanding all at once that his father had protected the woman he loved decades before either of them had ever met, and that the instructor who'd just trained his daughter had been quietly funded by his father's estate for years, without anyone in the family ever knowing why. He closed the journal, stood, and started making calls before the sun had fully risen, determined to find her before another single day passed. It took Min-jae 4 days to find her. The dance instructor wouldn't give up an address, loyal to a promise she'd made to Kayla years earlier, but she agreed to pass along a message. He wrote 3 drafts before settling on the simplest version. I found my father's journal. I know about the fire, the housing, the lessons. I know about her. Please let me see her. Kayla read the note standing in her kitchen 3 states away, hands shaking in a way she hadn't let them shake in years. She called Min-jae that night. You have a daughter, he said, before she could say anything else. I do. She's yours. She's been yours since before I even knew myself. The silence on the line lasted long enough that Kayla thought the call had dropped. When he spoke again, his voice had cracked open in a way she'd never heard from him, not even kneeling on a ballroom floor years earlier. I need to see both of you. Whatever it costs, whatever I have to fix, I need to see you. She agreed to meet him halfway. He arrived first, waiting outside a diner in a coat that did nothing to hide how exhausted the years had left him. When Kayla's car pulled in, he watched a small girl climb out first, dark curls bouncing, and something in his chest broke open completely. This is Ha-eun, Kayla said. I named her for your father. I didn't know at the time how much that would end up meaning. Min-jae knelt down slowly. Hi, I'm your dad. Ha-eun looked at her mother for permission, got a small nod, then stepped forward and hugged him without hesitation. Over the following weeks, everything unraveled at once. Min-jae hired an investigator to trace the pendant and found what he'd suspected but never proven. His mother had it appraised 18 months before it ever went missing, discovered it was a skilled replica, and used the fake as a weapon precisely because losing it would cost the family nothing real. Records showed the family's cleaning contractor had been paid, quietly, for after-hours access to Kayla's building the week the pendant disappeared. The forged medical records unraveled just as fast. The doctor's name on the letterhead belonged to a physician who'd retired 4 years before the documents were dated. The paper trail led to a print shop with financial ties to a rival family that had spent years trying to destabilize the Kang operations from the inside. The same family whose associates had tampered with the brake line on the car that nearly killed him. The investigation traced their motive back nearly a decade, to a shipping route the Kangs had taken from them in a deal Min-jae's father brokered before his death. A route they'd spent years trying to quietly take back, relationship by relationship, starting with the one closest to Min-jae's heart. The cousin confessed without much pressure at all, guilt having worn him down more than anyone realized. He told Min-jae about the letter, about burning it over his own sink. Kayla's friend from nursing school, the same one who'd helped her donate blood anonymously years earlier, now promoted to nurse manager after 4 years at the same hospital, reached out to Min-jae once she heard he was asking questions about the years he'd lost. She told him about the donations, the anonymous transfers, the 4 nights Kayla spent in the waiting room downstairs, instead of the family wing upstairs, leaving each time before anyone could connect her face to his chart. Min-jae sat with that information a long time before he brought it to Kayla directly. He didn't say much, just took her hand and told her he knew now, all of it, and that he'd spent years believing he'd survived that accident on his family's money and his mother's prayers, never once knowing the truth sitting quietly 2 floors below him the whole time. Min-jae found Seoyeon at a hotel bar downtown. There was never a pregnancy, he said. It wasn't a question. She didn't deny it right away, which was answer enough. The rival family paid well. Grief bought me time nobody thought to question. You knew about the car. I knew after, not before. That part I didn't sign up for. She stood, smoothed her coat, and walked out without another word. The investigator's report, delivered a week later, backed up what she'd said. Payment records showed the rival family had cut ties with her 2 months before the brake tampering was ever planned. Whatever she was guilty of, that particular truth hadn't been a lie. His mother didn't confess so much as collapse into it, admitting through tears that she'd been so afraid of losing him to someone she couldn't control, that she'd been willing to destroy anyone who threatened it. I was wrong, she told Kayla. I don't expect you to forgive me. I only hope you'll let me try to earn it, for Hakun's sake if nothing else. Kayla answered with time, the same currency she'd spent years learning to protect for herself and her daughter. A week before the anniversary of the night they'd first met, Min-jae had called Kayla with one request. Bring Ha-eun, and let her hide behind the ballroom curtain until the music started. Kayla had agreed without asking why, trusting him with the surprise the same way she'd once trusted him with a park by the river. She arrived to find the same ballroom, restored exactly as it had been, string lights and all, empty except for him standing in the center of the floor in a plain shirt. I'm not asking you to marry a mafia boss, or a name, he said, kneeling. I'm asking if you'll finish this with me. All of it. The parts we already survived, and whatever comes next. Kayla let herself say yes without hesitation. The music started. Ha-eun ran out from behind the curtain, laughing, grabbing both their hands, pulling them into a dance none of them had planned. Outside the ballroom doors, unseen by anyone inside, a car idled at the curb. A driver with ties to the same rival family, phone pressed to his ear, listening to instructions from someone who wasn't finished with the Kang family yet. If this story had you holding your breath until the very last second, let us know in the comments. And if you want to see what happens to Min-jae, Kayla, and Ha-eun next, make sure you like this video and subscribe to Afro-Korean Unique Tales, because this story isn't over yet.